Good morning. Welcome to the Trent England Show here on. I still want to say that we're on a radio network, even though we're obviously on video. We are live on Facebook and live on YouTube this morning, and I'm glad to have you here with us. The President's State of the Union address is tomorrow, so tomorrow on the program we'll do a little State of the Union preview, but not today. And also coming up this week, happiness. There's some fascinating research out actually from the Brookings Institute on happiness. They're, the Brookings Institute is on the left. They're one of these Washington, D.C. based left-leaning research groups that's been around for a long time, and they are confounded. They are very concerned. They are not sure what to say because of what their new research shows about happiness and who is happiest in America. And we're not going to dive into it today, but I will tell you this. It's not who you would expect, especially if you're a liberal. But I think nobody would probably guess. But it makes sense. If you're a conservative, it actually you can understand why it would be the case that actually certain groups of poor and minority Americans in this Brookings Institute data actually come out to be the happiest Americans of all, and even happier than people who have more stuff, and even happier than people who face less discrimination. So we'll get to that later this week. State of the Union preview tomorrow, State of the Union wrap-up on Wednesday, and happiness fit in there somewhere. But one thing that is sure to be a topic at the State of the Union address is immigration. I was following some of this over the weekend. There were arrests. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service did a sweep in North Texas and in Oklahoma, made over 100 arrests, but made 16 in Oklahoma. And it was fascinating because the way it ran in the Oklahoman yesterday was a story, I think an Associated Press story, about how, the Trump administration, Donald Trump is so nasty on immigration, and he's doing all these white supremacist things, like trying to arrest immigrants, and then it ran right, and credit to the Oklahoman for putting these stories together, ran right next to the story about these immigration arrests in Oklahoma. And who are they arresting? Let's see, who are they arresting here? People with prior criminal histories, people who had committed burglary, people who had committed drug possession, people who had committed larceny, trafficking in stolen goods. And up in Tulsa, they arrested people who had been convicted of drug possession, robbery, and sexually exploiting a minor. So yeah, I guess, the Trump administration is really nasty for going after people like that and trying to kick them out of the country, aren't they? Again, it just seems like the politics of this, as we are starting off 2018, it seems like the left is overplaying their hand and then some, right? Because when you actually look at these stories on the ground, every time they do an immigration sweep, it's like this, right? And when you look at the numbers, the Obama administration was actually deporting lots more people than the George W. Bush administration was deporting. So, when you actually look at what's going on in immigration on the ground in the United States of America in 2018 and over the last 10 years, the story, if we're not going to just blind ourselves with partisanship, and I'm a big critic of that, and I saw a lot of that you see that all the time. I saw a lot of that over the weekend, but we don't do that on the show, right? We don't say, well, we're partisan, we support this guy or we support that lady or whatever, so we got to gouge out our eyes or gouge out our moral compass so that we can slavishly follow some dogma or party or candidate or office holder. That's not what we do. When you actually look at things on the ground, when it comes to immigration, when you actually look at some of these policies, it'll be interesting to see if the president can lay this out tomorrow in a way that makes sense to people, because there's an argument here that makes sense to people. And what the amount of ground that the administration has given on some illegal aliens in the country, that is the correct legal term. Is illegal aliens, not a pejorative. It's just the correct legal term for people who are in the country illegally. The amount of ground that the president has given and the amount of vitriol he has received from some of his nuttier supporters, people like Ann Coulter, who is a lot of tacos short of the combination plate. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's the best evidence that the president is somewhere generally in the middle on all of this. But look, what I want to talk about today is there's a great column that ran yesterday in the Oklahoman from former United States Senator and physician Dr. Tom Coburn, known and loved in Oklahoma. He is very popular among Oklahomans. Public opinion polls, I saw a couple of different polls last year asking people, what do you think about this person, that person, current politicians, former politicians, and the most popular person in every poll that included him was Dr. Tom Coburn. And Dr. Tom Coburn had a great editorial in the Oklahoman yesterday about the tendency of politicians to treat the symptoms and not the disease, to go after the symptoms rather than try to understand the root causes of problems. I want to talk about that a little bit. I'll tell you what he had to say, but I want to dive into something else that was it's actually in the newspaper today about higher education. We'll get to this in just a minute. Where the same thing is true, but it's not pointed out as often. It's not pointed out as much. It's easy to look at government spending and see that the easiest thing for politicians to do is just treat the symptoms, right? If there's a problem in government, you can always at least cover it up. You can always at least claim to be doing something if you just pour more tax dollars on it, right? I mean, this is easy, and you don't have to be a liberal to want to do that, right? Lots of people who think they're conservatives, and maybe they are, they take the same approach, right? They see a problem in government, and they realize very quickly that the easiest way to deal with it, right? The compromise, right? If you want to compromise, the only way to compromise is to pour more money on it. Because if you don't pour more money on it, if you do anything else, you're going to upset somebody's apple cart, and you at least can't have consensus, right? And consensus is sort of the opposite of leadership, right? Consensus means I don't want to have to sacrifice the fact that people are going to say bad things about me and at least disagree with me if I take if I actually exercise leadership and take a position and try to do something, right? If I just pour more money on the whole thing, then everybody, almost everybody can be happy. As long as taxpayers don't notice, as long as people don't notice, everybody who's paying attention can be happy. What did Dr. Coburn have to say in this piece yesterday? He said the answer to the state government's failures is not more money, it's fiscally responsible governance. And he runs through a whole bunch of, and this is the great thing about this, right? And this is why, I told you Senator Coburn, Dr. Coburn, the most popular sort of political figure in Oklahoma, even though he's been out of office for several years, not popular among insiders. But popular with people because, he doesn't just throw a bunch of rhetoric out there. He actually throws, he's got sort of a bullet point list of what could we do in Oklahoma to actually make government work better. I want to run through this. Most of these are things we've talked about on the show before. I run through these things that Senator Coburn pointed out. The first thing he points out, we've talked about this a lot, is state government actually has more money to spend. They have more money to spend this year, thanks to a growing economy, and the projection is that they're going to have a lot more money to spend next year. And I'm predicting that by the time the March revenue forecasts come out, there will be almost no shortfall in the next budget at all. Could be none. I think there will be a little bit. But because of the size of these huge revolving funds, all of this one-time funding that they spend every year, right? They call it one-time funding, but they spend it every year because these agency revolving funds, in some cases, not in every case, but in some cases, they collect more money than the agencies actually need. That's not really one-time money, right? It's phony. They call it one-time money, but that's not what it is. When you include that, there will be no shortfall in the 2019 budget year. Right, there will be no shortfall. He points out that the budget gap has dropped to less than $200 million. Actually, actually as low as $120 million, depending on how you count it all up. What does he point out here? Medicaid enrollment audits. I've got a story on Medicaid enrollment that we'll get to in just a minute here. Medicaid enrollment audits. The Hollywood, subsidies just in general, crony capitalism, right? Rooting crony capitalism out of Oklahoma government. Here, let let's go through each one of these and talk about why are these controversial? Why is it hard? Even in red Oklahoma, supposedly conservative Oklahoma, even with big Republican majorities in the legislature, why are these things hard? Because people ask me that all the time. I get asked this all the time. Why, I go out and I speak to Tea Party groups or partisan groups or civic groups, and people ask me, why don't they just do this stuff, right? I mean, are they stupid? Are they corrupt? People, I'm just saying, that's what people ask me this all the time. I mean, let's walk through, why are these things hard? Medicaid enrollment audits. Why is that challenging? Well, look, you're asking a government agency to do something that they don't already do, right? So look, I mean, if somebody comes to you in your job and says, I want you to do something new, I mean, that's asking you to do more work. It might just take some more work to get it going, right? It might not be more work in the long run, but there's always work involved in change, right? So you're asking a government bureaucracy to change. You're always going to get pushback when you do that. Always, right? And you're also making it harder, right? Agencies tend to, and again, none of this is personal. I'm not making accusations about anybody's motives, but when you work in a government agency and your job is to deliver welfare, the tendency in every case, all the time, is to see to measure your success as signing more people up for your program, right? And so when you go to a government program and say, we want you to focus on trying to reduce the number of people by making sure that people aren't defrauding this program, reduce the number of people on this program, that goes against the grain. So we've got asking people to do something new, maybe work a little bit harder, but at least asking for some change. We've got reversing the incentives or going against the incentives to just sign more people up for welfare. We also have the particularly awkward, anytime you go into a government agency and you ask for audits, the problem is the people who work there are going to feel like, and I mean, legitimately, I guess, you're going to feel like you're going to come along and look over my shoulder and check my work, right? And it's a no-win situation, isn't it? Because either you're going to say everything was fine and, nobody's going to hand out awards for everything is fine, or you're going to find that there is fraud in the system. And people are going to look at me and say, why did you allow that fraud in the system? Now, that shouldn't be there shouldn't be resistance because of that when it comes to these Medicaid enrollment audits, because they don't do them now, right? So they haven't been given the tools. What Senator Coburn is asking the legislature to do is give the agency both the tools and a mandate to actually do these enrollment audits, make sure that people on Medicaid are actually legally allowed to be on Medicaid, that they're not, what happens is you get people who go down to the welfare office and they say, we're dirt poor. Here's some information that shows we're dirt poor. And then they go down and they buy a pickup truck and they say, oh yeah, we've got lots of income. We've got plenty of money to buy this pickup truck, right? I mean, this is not a large group of people on Medicaid, but there are people, they found this in other states when they do these enrollment audits, they go out and they look for information like this and they discover there are people who are, in that case, they're defrauding somebody. Right, and they also find that there are people who legitimately got on Medicaid at one point, but then they get a bunch more income, and they don't need to be on Medicaid anymore, and they just don't tell anybody, and they're still on Medicaid. Maybe they don't know, maybe they know, and they would rather just get the free stuff. But look, so you've got resistance for asking a bureaucracy to change. You've got resistance because you're going against the grain, going against the incentives to sign more people up for these programs. And you've got resistance because people feel like nobody likes people looking over their shoulders, right? And this is always a challenge in government because transparency and accountability mean looking over people's shoulders. And I've talked about this, I remember talking about this on the radio program last year, working on election security. And, there are two kinds of people who run elections for the government. There are people who say, come on in, check my work, make sure this is honest. I want you to see it. I don't want it. I'm not going to tell you to trust. I understand that it's got to be trust and verify. And there are other people who run elections who say, how dare you question my integrity? Sit down, shut up. I'm going to do my thing. And, they might not be stealing elections, but they shouldn't be in public service because they have an attitude, right, that goes against the whole idea of public service. But for those three reasons, Medicaid enrollment audits get tremendous pushback from people who work in the agency, who are in most cases, maybe in every case, who are working hard, trying to serve poor Oklahomans. And look, this is why being in the legislature calls for leadership, right? Because you've got to be willing to stand up to people and say, look, sometimes bureaucracies have to change. Sometimes change is hard. Sometimes we've got to go against the incentives in the agencies. And at the end of the day, that's what it means to actually honor taxpayers and make government run efficiently. Okay, the Hollywood handout. This is the next thing that Dr. Coburn points to in his op-ed. He talks about subsidies, and this is the first subsidy he mentions. And why is it hard to get rid of that? I have people ask me, why is it hard to get rid of this handout that enriched Harvey Weinstein with Oklahoma taxpayer dollars, right? That mostly, I mean, the Harvey Weinstein thing, I mean, that the Film and Television Commission says that's their greatest achievement. I think that's still sort of, if you look through their press releases, that their greatest achievement was enriching Harvey Weinstein, because most of the films that they subsidize never make it to movie theaters. Most of the films that they subsidize are basically hobby films, right? They're 43 minutes long. They never go to any movie theaters, right? They're lucky that they live in the age of the internet, so they can upload them to YouTube, and maybe a dozen people watch them, right? And I'm making fun of it a little bit because our tax dollars are involved. If our tax dollars weren't involved, more power to people who want to go and do that. I'm sure it's fun, and I'm sure that people learn a lot, and I'm sure that it's a great way for people to try to break into real movie making. But I don't understand why Oklahomans would subsidize it. Most people I talk to don't understand why Oklahomans would subsidize it, why the legislature would allow that to happen. It seems patently absurd. Best case scenario, we enrich millionaires in Hollywood. Worst case scenario, we fund somebody's hobby. Why would we do that? Well, look, concentrated benefits diffuse costs. Basic economic concept. Basic concept in political economics, right? The problem is there's just a teensy-weensy little handful of Oklahomans who benefit from this. And some of them are politicians, right? Politicians love to hobnob with celebrities. They love it. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of politicians do, right? A lot of people at the state capitol, I mean, if they get a chance to stand and talk to Julia Roberts for 45 seconds at some movie reception because they took $4 million of your tax dollars and subsidized Harvey Weinstein, right? That to them is worth it. It's not their money, right? It's not their money. It's absolutely worth it. It's a great investment for them. They get to tell people for the rest of their lives that they met Julia Roberts, right? They won't tell people they met Harvey Weinstein anymore. But look, I mean, that's a great investment because it's not their money. It costs them nothing. And there's a small group of people in Oklahoma who make movies mostly as a hobby and some people as a profession, and they benefit from this. They get hundreds of thousands of dollars from these subsidies. They have an intense reason to go and lobby the legislature. And I mean, all the time, when the legislature's in session, when they're not in session, I see them on Twitter. They say nasty things about me on social media because, look, they make money this way. They get if you got hundreds of thousands of dollars from some Hollywood handout, some subsidy, some crony capitalism, right? I mean, we would tend to, I mean, if we didn't have principles, we would tend to defend that, right? To defend that tooth and nail, and people do. And on the other hand, taxpayers and well-meaning legislators look at it and say, look, it's only $4 million. It's an absurdity. It's an insult to the tax-paying public, but it's $4 million. Why should I engage in this fight and have all of these Hollywood people and all of these, filmmaking people who make money off of this? Why should I attract all of their ire and my colleagues in the legislature who like to hobnob with celebrities? Why should I, they're going to come and they're going to be mad at me. I don't want to do that. So look, this is why it's hard to get rid of the Hollywood handout, but we can do it. Dr. Coburn says we can do it. I say we can do it. We can actually do it. Part of making it happen is understanding why there's so much pushback, right? And understanding it's not because legislators are morons. I have people tell me that all the time. They're just morons. They're just morons down there and say it's not true. It's incentives, right? And it's until taxpayers actually stand up and create the same amount of pressure as these little special interests do. Create the same amount of pressure as people inside the agencies do. Create the same amount of pressure as people who get these handouts do, right? And when taxpayers do that, these things go away. They do. And we've seen some of it go away on the next thing that Dr. Coburn mentions, and that's subsidies for wind companies. There still are subsidies, there's still crony capitalism, but some of it has been rolled back, and it's because taxpayers finally stood up and told the legislature in as loud a voice as these wind companies and these wind, at one point there were 42, I think, lobbyists working for wind companies up at the Oklahoma State Legislature. That's a lot, by the way. I mean, that's nobody else came close to that. But it's a lot of money. It's millions, tens of millions of dollars, your tax dollars, going to a handful of special interests. And of course, they're going to invest, if it's millions of dollars, if it's tens of millions of dollars for them, of course it's worth it to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in lobbyists to keep that going. The good thing is, there are hundreds of thousands, no, there are millions of taxpayers in Oklahoma who don't benefit from this. And it's just a question of can we find enough of us to stand up and speak out and push back? And we've done that in the past, and we've rolled back some of these wind subsidies, but there's still more to do. Okay, what else do we have here? This one I really like. This one is really important. The subsidies to tribes, I'll just read this quote here from Dr. Coburn in his piece in the Oklahoman yesterday. The state cheats itself, Oklahoma state government cheats itself by more than $100 million annually, $100 million a year in state tribal gaming tax revenue because of its below-market gaming tax rate. And the one that we haven't really talked about that one on the show, but the one that we talked about on the show, Oklahoma pays tribal governments more than $50 million annually to sell cigarettes. I've talked, at least on the radio, I've talked about this. I mean, this is something again, people find out about this and their hair sort of stands on end. They say, how could this happen? How could the governor negotiate compacts with the various tribes in Oklahoma that give away all of this supposed cigarette tax revenue, and then they don't just give it away, they allow the tribes to rebate it back to tribal smoke shops so that the governor is able to talk about, as has been the case for the last couple of years, the governor is able to talk about, I want, these cigarette taxes are so important. I want cigarette taxes to be higher. We're going to raise the cigarette tax by $1.50. We're going to, oh, no, wait, it's a fee. No, wait, it's not a fee. We're going to raise cigarette taxes by $1.50 per pack. And if that were to happen, just like is the case right now, because of compacts, agreements that the governor has negotiated and signed, on tribal land, in smoke shops on tribal land, convenience stores on tribal land, the quote-unquote cigarette taxes that are going to keep people from smoking get rebated to the tribes, in some cases rebated to the smoke shops, and turned into subsidies for people purchasing cigarettes. Right? Have you ever heard that in a speech? Do you think we're going to hear that in the State of the State speech that's coming up on the first Monday in February, on February 5th? Do you think we'll hear that there? A description of that, right? I mean, I'm glad that the governor, I'm glad that Dr. Coburn has pointed this out, because look, as we've said here on the program, nobody is serious about using cigarette taxes to decrease smoking if they are not trying to change these tribal compacts. No, that it is simply in the world of public policy in Oklahoma in 2018. The only way to use cigarette taxes to really reduce smoking is to deal with these tribal compacts that allow some cigarette taxes to turn into subsidies for cigarette purchases. And politicians who don't want to acknowledge that are just trying to raise some easy money and claim credit for reducing smoking. And smoking's going down anyway. I mean, smoking, you could have no TSET, you could have no cigarette taxes in Oklahoma. Smoking would still be going down. You know what correlates with smoking going down? Educational attainment, right? The more educated people are, the less they tend to smoke. That's the history, and we're going to get to higher education in just a minute. That's how we're going to finish out the show. But that's, again, no TSET, no cigarette taxes, smoking in Oklahoma would still be going down. But people politicians do something, they get to claim credit for whatever happens, even if it would have happened anyway. It's one of the fundamental rules of politics, right? If you're a good politician, you look out there, you see something good happening, and you say, how can I do something related to that so that when, more of that good thing happens, I can claim credit for it and win elections? That's basic politics 101. Okay, so we've got tribal gaming revenue, and we've got the cigarette taxes that become cigarette subsidies. Okay, finally here, we have patronage and mission creep. Dr. Coburn calls these the fundamental flaws of K-12 and higher education, which I think is great and true. We're going to come back to that. What else does he mention here? Pension administration in Oklahoma. That's kind of a wonky one, but it's a way the state government could save some of your money. And finally, TSET. We talk about TSET a lot on the Trent England show here because it is a $1.1 billion piggy bank in a state government that claims to be broke. They've got $1.1 billion in the bank, and they get money every year from the tobacco settlement. They get money every year in interest on this $1.1 billion that they have in the bank, and they spend some of it on really important things and some of it on really silly and insulting things. And obviously, we should reform it. Dr. Coburn says reforming it is long overdue, and he could not be more correct. And he finishes out here by talking about oversight, year-round oversight in the legislature. That's something we talked a lot about on the program before as well, and certainly something that we need to do. So patronage and mission creep, fundamental flaws in K-12 and higher education. I want to talk about higher education. I will say they juxtaposed, in the Oklahoman yesterday, they had Senator Coburn, Dr. Coburn's op-ed on the top, and they had Burns Hargis, former president of the Oklahoma Bar Association, former candidate for governor, Burns Hargis, now the president of Oklahoma State University. They had his op-ed kind of making the opposite argument, that all government needs is more money. And, from inside government, surprise, surprise, we get someone saying that all government needs is just more money. He also says we're ranked at the top in areas such as opioid addiction and female incarceration, which is interesting because the first of those is not true, and the second of those is an area where, Oklahomans of goodwill have come together and tried to reform our criminal justice system to reduce that, which would save money. I mean, isn't it interesting that even bureaucrats arguing for more money wind up stumbling into these areas where if we just ran government better, if we had a better criminal justice system in Oklahoma, we could save money. If we had a criminal justice system that worked better and sent fewer women and men as well to prison, to be warehoused in prison, if we actually could figure out how to turn people back into productive, tax-paying members of society, that would save money. Right, but he doesn't want to talk about that. He doesn't want to talk about changes in government that could make government more efficient. He just wants to talk about how government needs more money. I'm not going to go through his op-ed. It's exactly what you would expect from somebody who is a former politician and the president of one of Oklahoma's largest and wealthiest universities, Oklahoma State University. I'm glad he wrote it, though, because we spend a lot of time talking about OU. It's good to be able to point out that a lot of the same things go on at OSU. Look, these are fabulously wealthy institutions, right? And it's always sad when the political consultants arguing, helping put together these campaigns for higher taxes. It's always sad when the only people they can find to sign these op-eds for them are people who represent parts of Oklahoma government that have more money than they know what to do with. If you think I'm wrong, go drive around Stillwater or drive around Norman. But we've got this story. It's in the Oklahoman this morning. Vital Signs report shows higher education achievement. I've got it on my screen too, so I like to hold up the paper, but it would be kind of awkward if I tried to read it off that now that we're doing a video program and not just radio. We've got this Vital Signs report shows higher education achievement in Oklahoma flat for past decade, which is interesting. Well, just the headline is interesting. What is this? This is a report by the United Way of Central Oklahoma. They look at different factors that they say are important to quality of life. One of those factors is degree attainment, educational attainment, right? What certificates you have to hang on your wall from institutions that claim to be institutions of higher education. And look, I'm going to make fun of this a little bit because I think higher education is so important that we shouldn't surrender it to the politicians and we shouldn't surrender it to the statisticians, right? We shouldn't surrender it to the people who put together this Vital Signs report who just want to talk about numbers, just want to talk about symptoms and not actually investigate causes. I saw this and I was thinking about Senator Coburn's op-ed yesterday. I thought, this is just perfect. Senator Coburn, Dr. Coburn wrote a great article about the tendency in politics to just want to treat the symptom, especially among politicians, right? Just treat the symptom because the symptom's the obvious thing, right? And you can, you can put a lot of band-aids on things and convince people that things are getting better, and then you're term limited and it's somebody else's problem, right? I mean, it makes sense. It's the incentives, it's human nature at work in politics, and it's exactly what we see in higher education. But in some ways, I think it's more nefarious because I think even ordinary people sometimes buy into this idea that the only problem in higher education is the symptoms. And in Oklahoma, one of the symptoms is lower degree attainment, right? What do they say here? The report shows that on average in the United States of America, for people aged 25 and older, the report shows more than 18% of Americans aged 25 and older earned a bachelor's degree between 2007 and 2016. Well, the number in Oklahoma is actually only slightly less. Just under 16%, so a couple percentage points less. I mean, it's not meaningless, but it's not a huge margin either. But in the very next paragraph, it tells us something interesting. Or two paragraphs down. Sorry. Further down. Sorry, we're not scrolling through this here. Here we go. No, it is in the next paragraph. Sorry, they combine things together. They say the state's rate also was below the national average for adults who earned an associate, graduate, or professional degree, but was higher. So Oklahoma's higher in one of these numbers here. Think about what this tells us. You have to think about it because the article in the newspaper doesn't explore this at all. Oklahoma was higher, 24%, for adults who completed some college without earning a degree, compared to the nation, 21%. So hang on, right there we have something really, that is really, really interesting. Because right there, when you look at that, you say, well, wait a second. If we just, there's a margin there, right? There's a 3% or so margin of Oklahomans. 3% more Oklahomans started college but didn't finish than the national average. We're dealing in averages, and I'm going to cut through all that in just a minute as well. But just sticking with the averages, sticking with the way they want to talk about things in this report, if that 3% of Oklahomans had completed their associate degree or their bachelor's degree, we were 2% lower in that area in this statistic. If those 3% of Oklahomans would have just completed that degree, if they all would have got bachelor's degrees, we would have bounced to being higher than the national average. So we actually had more Oklahomans starting college, slightly more Oklahomans starting college, but fewer people successfully completing college. Okay, so if you want to address the symptom, what do? You make it easier to get that college diploma. You lower the standards. Right, you lower the standards and you can increase degree completion. This is why I hate this conversation about degree completion, degree attainment. It's frightening, because the easiest way to increase the number of people who get degrees, right? I mean, isn't that true? If what we want in Oklahoma is more people with college degrees, look, there's a bus stop outside of the studio here. Let's print some college degrees, get Burns Hargis to sign them. We'll take them and hand them out. Right? Nobody's going to admit that they are going to do something like that. Nobody's going to do something quite like that, frankly, because that's not, the money is made by running the bureaucracy. If we just gave out degrees, there's you're cutting out a lot of middlemen. But look, if all we're going to focus on is degree attainment, we're going to miss the big picture. And you get this statistic, they throw this in here, they always throw this in, all these stories. I want to blow all these things up for all of us, right? I don't want us to ever read another story like this again and miss what's really going on here and miss just how dangerous for the state of Oklahoma stories like this are, thinking like this is. They throw in this statistic. Projections show 77% of Oklahoma's jobs in 2025, 7 years from now, will require more than a high school diploma, highlighting the critical need for higher education. Again, look, what do people really need? Do people need a piece of paper, or do people need education? right? And this, I actually find this frightening because it's the easy way to talk about all education, but especially higher education. Right? I mean, the problem in higher education, you can't have a standardized test because people are doing all sorts of different things. They're specializing in all sorts of different directions. It's a lot harder to figure out in higher education whether people are really being educated, whether people are really being given something of value for their money, their investment of time and other resources, for taxpayer money. But look, we know we don't just want to give people degrees, right? You read this whole story and you could think, look, let's just go hand out degrees to people, or let's just lower the standards to get educational degrees. One of the things I love about studying the American founding, and that's my first love, studying the American founding. And one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating is how much they talk about education and how much they talk about higher education and how little it ever has to do with public policy. They're actually interested in the substance of the thing. What do people need to learn? What do people need to learn in a free society? What do people need to learn if we want to have a functioning republic? What do people need to learn that's going to get them out to the polls, to vote, to participate in democratic elections? What do people need to learn to rise up and become statesmen? And not just your run-of-the-mill politician, right? What is it what's the substance of higher education? They talk about it a lot. They talk about it in terms that we almost never find in our debates today about higher education. It's about dollars and it's about degrees. It's about pieces of paper, right? Two different kinds of pieces of paper: dollar bills and the degrees that they hand out. Not about the substance of the thing. I think it's a tragedy. And the problem in Oklahoma is we have been spending more and more and more money on higher education. Most of that increase has been coming from, if you go back far enough, the increase is in tax dollars, but most of the increase over the last 10 years has come from tuition payers and fee payers. It's come from Oklahomans who go to school, Oklahomans who go to college, Oklahomans who go to university, Oklahomans who go to community college, and they've put a lot more money into that system. They have made a lot of politicians and retired politicians very wealthy people. They have supported a lot of very big institutions. You have a lot of graduates, a lot of donors who have also put an incredible amount of money into institutions like the University of Oklahoma, like Oklahoma State University, and some of the other schools as well. But those two schools get most of the private donations. We have a huge investment in so-called education in Oklahoma, and we almost never talk about what really matters, which is what actually goes on and what people actually walk away with from these schools, right? It would be harder for the United Way of Central Oklahoma to do a report or for legislators to hold a hearing on the value of the degrees granted by OSU, OU, any of our institutions of higher education. The return on investment. How much do people spend, taxpayers and tuition payers together? How much do we spend? And what do we get out of it? But if we don't do that, we can guarantee that we're wasting a lot of money, right? If there's not oversight, the one thing we know about any agency, right, in government, outside of government, if there's not accountability, there will always be waste. It's just human nature. It's easier to waste money than it is to spend it well. So I was glad that Dr. Coburn points to higher education as one of the ways that we could be saving money in the great state of Oklahoma. There's a lot more. I've got to put a plug in for our Freedom Agenda perspective. I think we've got it up on the screen, so I won't hold it up. But Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, if you're interested in a lot of the ideas that Dr. Coburn mentioned are actually in OCPA's Perspective magazine. It's all about the Freedom Agenda. Is always starting the year. We always start the year by saying, look, here's how to make government work better for Oklahomans. Here's how to serve Oklahomans better. And it's got, we've got Medicaid audits in there. We've got reforming the budget process. We have criminal justice reform, judicial selection, schools that serve children whose parents are in the criminal justice system, right, which is a way to both do something better in education and also try to break the cycle of poverty and crime in Oklahoma. That is in there, giving school districts more flexibility to increase teacher pay on their own, reducing the regulations on traditional public schools. I saw, by the way, I'll throw this in just for free as we're getting ready to wrap up the program. So we have this article here on reducing regulation. It's a 2-page spread. It's one of the biggest articles in this. I saw yesterday on Twitter a former public school bureaucrat, middle management guy. I think he was a assistant superintendent in some medium-sized school district, complaining about he was trying to sound like he was complaining about regulations in public schools, but his agenda was to get more regulations on private schools, right? And it's always so fascinating, right? When you go and you talk to teachers are so frustrated with all the regulations piled on schools. A lot of principals are, unless they've got their eye on serving as a superintendent or some lobbying job or moving into some cush job in higher education or something like that. And most good principals, good teachers focused on educating kids are so frustrated with all the red tape. But a lot of that doesn't get dealt with because the same people who are getting serious about trying to deal with red tape in traditional public schools are also the same people asking bigger questions about education, trying to find ways to advance school choice, put more power in the hands of parents, put more power in the hands of teachers. And the defenders of top-down, centralized, controlled, traditional government monopolized education, they don't want to work toward reducing those regulations because they don't want to work with people who are asking more fundamental questions about schools. But anyhow, I'm hopeful that we can push through that as well in this upcoming session of the Oklahoma legislature. Lots of good ideas, lots of important things in this issue of Perspective Magazine. You can go to ocpathink.org and find a lot of the content there. And if you join the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, you actually get Perspective Magazine in the mail with all those good ideas. And then you can turn around and you can send those ideas to your state legislature and actually make government better in Oklahoma. We ran through a whole bunch of ways to do that today, most of them coming out of Dr. Coburn's op-ed that was in the Oklahoman yesterday. There are so many ways to make Oklahoma government run better, more efficiently, more respectful of taxpayers, and more honest as government uses tax dollars. So many things that should be on the agenda before raising taxes. Right? We're hearing, if you let us raise taxes, then we're going to make a lot of reforms. Interesting. You let us raise taxes, and then we're going to get so serious about reforms. You decide for yourself. I'm not going to you decide for yourself whether you consider that a trustworthy position. Tomorrow is the State of the Union, President Trump's first State of the Union address. We will give you the preview of that tomorrow on the show, the wrap-up on Wednesday. We're going to talk about happiness. We have a liberal research group that has discovered that the happiest Americans are actually poorer. The happiest Americans are actually minorities. Why is that? The liberals have a really hard time understanding it. I have some ideas. I have an explanation. I think as a conservative, I can figure this out. You can figure this out. If you have thoughts about it, send me your thoughts. If you have feedback on the program, as always, follow us on YouTube. Follow the OCPA YouTube channel. Like us on Facebook. And give me a follow on Twitter as well. Just Trent England on Twitter. And you can also go to the website, ocpathink.org, the website of the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. You can get Perspective Magazine. You can get a lot more. You can find the whole archive of the radio show, the new video show, the Trent England Show is right there at ocpathink.org. Thank you so much for watching this Monday morning, and we will be back every morning at 9 a.m. the rest of this week.